Hi, I'm Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelan McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelan Scoop.
We have a great show for you today.
But we always say that. But we really do have a great show for you today. We're going to be joined quite soon by Toby Young.
Toby Young, a British commentator with a lot to say. He's got a website called lockdownskeptics.org.
Which is amazing. A really great clearinghouse for all kinds of information about a skeptical look at all the information to do with the coronavirus.
And the skeptical look at the lockdowns, skeptical look at the figures being produced by governments, all that. But we have other stories.
Before we get to Toby Young, yes, we have some other stories. The Obama production company, Higher Ground, have a documentary coming out on Netflix. And you will not believe the subject that they chose for their first documentary.
You will be shocked at who it is. It's an amazingly original choice.
It is.
It's a really higher ground.
It is higher ground.
And at this terrible time, when most people are focused on mortality and the fragility of life, you won't guess, you will never guess
what Hollywood celebrities have coalesced around as fundraiser
for their latest fundraiser.
For their latest fundraiser at this time when we're all considering mortality.
They're a lovely bunch. And we have a book you have to order on Amazon right now, even though I'm not going to tell you the title. This is a book you have to order. That is an order. In a time when we're being ordered about a lot, I'm ordering you.
Yeah, look at us ordering you around.
Yeah, with your spare time, you spend a lot of time on Amazon. This is the book you're going to order.
But we're going to start by, remember Netflix a year ago made a deal with the Obamas that they would produce, content for the streaming giant. And the details of the deal were never made public, but at the time, Newsweek reported, and here's what they said. Here's the quote that they said. Netflix has courted and locked down other big players in the entertainment industry to similar exclusive deals, which might give you an idea of what the Obamas will earn in the course of their contract. So Grey's Anatomy creator Shonda Rhimes signed a deal estimated to be worth $150 million over 5 years in 2017. And the Glee and American Horror Story creator Ryan Murphy signed a 5-year deal worth a reported $300 million last year. And this was obviously a year ago. So in 2018, Ryan Murphy got $300 million.
Yes.
So who's to say what the Obamas got in 2019?
But I'm sure they got a pleasant paycheck.
A very pleasant.
Can I just add,
yes.
slightly
Go
off topic?
Go ahead and add there, Phelan.
Slightly off topic. Why the secrecy? Why not?
Because it would be all into transparency.
Why
and all
not
that kind
transparency?
Of thing.
If we want Trump's tax returns, why don't we get what the Obamas got for
in the Netflix deal? Absolutely. And the worst thing would be perhaps they've been I don't know, racially profiled and they weren't paid as much, for example, as Ryan.
Well, I want to know.
As Ryan Murphy.
I'm actually worried that Michelle is only getting 84 cents for every dollar that her husband is getting because of the fake gender disparity.
But anyway, the really important news this week is that the Obamas are coming out with the first originally produced show that they've done, first original produced content they've done for Netflix. And
they bought another. They did buy
the first kind of big. Their debut, I suppose, with Netflix was an acquired item called American Factory which was bought at Sundance, right? Sundance Festival. But they acquired that. They didn't produce it themselves. So this is their first time producing something. Their first entry. So after getting this huge amount of money,
it's going to be amazing. It's going to be a really cool documentary about something really cool, undercover subject.
So you think about documentaries, stories. And I'm sure it's an unreported story because you think about subjects that are worthy of a documentary film, right?
In their world.
In their world, right? So leprosy,
racism,
genital mutilation in women, racism, LGBTQ
racism,
something, LGBTQ orphans,
racism.
Islamophobic orphans.
Racism.
I don't know. Sexual abuse, child abuse, cancer, orphans. Did I say orphans?
Dyslexic orphans.
We mentioned orphans already.
But
so it'll be something
we didn't do
like
dyslexic ones. What about dyslexic orphans suffering from racism?
It'll be something like dyslexic orphans. I would have thought it would be something like dyslexic orphans suffering from racism. However, knock me and Phelan down with a feather. Out of all the bad things out there in the world that need attention and need a documentary, desperately need a documentary on Netflix, and all the things worthy, all those stories that are really worthy to be told.
What could
They
it
have
be?
chosen, of all the subjects out
Oh,
there,
I need to know, Anne.
for
I need
their
to know.
original first production.
What is it?
It's called Becoming, and it's a documentary following the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, on her 34-city book tour.
Hold on.
It will be a rare and up-close look at her life.
Well, hold on a moment.
So
now.
it's a documentary
The
about
Obamas are
Michelle.
producing a documentary about Michelle Obama, which they're editing, filming, and it'll be a rare and up-close look, maybe, but it won't be a truthful one. It won't be an honest one. What if...
That's one part of it, Philip. I think the other part of it is, what about all the really worthy things? Because here's the question. We know that this week, for example, it's kind of funny, there was this big story in the New York Times. We reported it on Monday. The 3 journalists in the New York Times had got together, spent enormous amount of time, had done an enormous amount of analysis of the 260,000 words that Donald Trump had uttered since, I think, the 6th of March in his daily briefings on the coronavirus.
That's right.
And these 3 very highly regarded journalists,
Very
I think
self-regarded.
potentially Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists from the New York Times, which is a Pulitzer Prize-winning recipient itself, had parsed and analysed and worked over, and with huge graphics and an amazing amount of effort, had looked into all these words. And you know what they concluded after looking for a long time at all the words of Donald Trump? They decided that he was a narcissist and a self-promoter. Well, I'll tell you one thing. He could learn something off the Obamas. Michelle Obama could teach him a thing or two about self-promotion. Because we'll remember, by the way, that the Becoming book, by the way, and I don't know, I have to ask the question, Phil, which I did ask before, was Michelle Obama's memoir called Becoming. Becoming what now exactly, Michelle? Becoming the wife of a famous guy, is it? Is that what she's becoming? Or becoming very rich, by the way. Is that what it is, becoming?
Getting a diversity, when your husband becomes a senator, getting a job in a hospital as a diversity coordinator for what, $385,000 a year, diversity and community outreach. And then when you leave and your husband leaves his job, they don't replace you.
Oh, yes. So that was a vital service. She was an essential worker at that hospital, obviously,
yes,
right?
yes.
Or obviously not an essential worker at that hospital because she didn't need to be
The
replaced.
word essential, essential is a moving feast.
Anyway, Michelle Obama's best-selling book, Becoming, was just loved by everyone, 10 million copies. But the thing that I really love about it was when she finished with that book and everything, and of course now they've made the documentary of it, but between the book and the documentary about the book, which is coming out soon to Netflix sofa near you, between those, she also decided then that it wasn't enough, that she hadn't made enough money, so she would then publish a Becoming journal. So it's like a book with like empty pages, and then you've got to do things like list things. And the things that she would have in that would be things like, list 10 fun things you like to do. Or describe a memorable dinner.
Your head, so people can see your eyes.
Oh, people see my eyes. Describe a memorable dinner. What did you eat? Did you eat at home or somewhere else? We all know the answer to that now, don't we?
Yeah.
Not somewhere else, obviously at home. Look outside a window in your home, write down what you see. List.
This is my favourite.
Okay, Phelan's favourite.
My favourite.
In the Becoming journal.
This is the reason I would almost buy the Becoming journal. List 10 favourite vegetables and how you like to prepare them.
Oh,
My question is, are there 10 vegetables?
Yes, Philip, there are. Yeah, just because you don't know what they are doesn't mean that there aren't. And then the other thing that she did, that Michelle did then was, because that wasn't enough, and list 10 your 10 favourite movies. She then created and started flogging a huge amount of merchandise. So she had this merch and things that are vital and that you all really need, like a bookmark with the word Becoming on it, Becoming Michelle Obama, for $10, or a tote bag with Becoming Michelle Obama written on it.
It actually is written Becoming, and then she signs it Michelle Obama.
That's right. The tote bag, $35
It's not
by the way.
Becoming in general, it's Becoming Michelle Obama. I mean, at least when they did Being John Malkovich, I think they were being sarcastic. But
and there's a water bottle, which some people might like. There's the Becoming Michelle Obama water bottle. And on and on and on and on and on. But it's
does that mean the water bottle is going to turn into Michelle Obama?
I just think it's an amazing thing to be.
And by the way, can I just say, on the merch page, all the merchandise they feature is black. Just saying. It's all black.
Oh, well, that's that particular page, Phelim. I mean, maybe it's not all black, but yeah. But there's that particular page. No, the tote bag is white.
Okay.
Now, Phelim, behave yourself.
Token tote bag.
A token tote bag.
Yes.
That's a tough one to say now, by the way.
Yes.
But anyway, it's a really great thing to be. It makes me realise, by the way, it's a great thing to be a Democrat, because this Becoming documentary that the Obamas have decided to be the first thing that the original content that they've produced for Netflix comes very hot on the heels of Hulu's series, 4-part docu-series about Hillary, called Hillary, which tells the story about Hillary Clinton. And according to I love this, by the way. The Guardian's Peter Bradshaw called it sympathetic and respectful. You know, isn't it lovely too, though, if you're a Democrat, that the documentary you make about yourself or whatever is called
or even the documentary made about you, which, I mean, I think almost it goes without saying, if you make a documentary about someone and it's sympathetic and respectful, it's not a documentary.
Possibly not, yes. But and either way, I think this is kind of an extraordinary thing. You know, the New York Times, it's interesting as well that at the time that the Obamas did the deal with Netflix, which we're now looking at, it must be around $200 million deal at least. At least. They got, by the way, for their book deal, they got $65 million. And do I sound jealous? 100%. I'm going to fess up to that. But it's interesting that last year, when the New York Times were reporting on the deal that they did with Netflix, they said, here quoting the New York Times, they said the Obamas are intent on avoiding any material that could inflame tensions at a red-hot political moment, particularly as the 2020 presidential election begins to ramp up. Now that's a little bit interesting.
And as Joe Biden did say recently, he would pick Michelle Obama for his VP in a heartbeat, which is a very unfortunate choice of words.
Correct, given the man's health.
Yes. However, and Magda wrote to me this morning, when she saw this, that they were making this documentary about, or Michelle was making a documentary about Michelle, and saying, does this mean she's running for VP? And the answer is, well, Valerie Jarrett, who lives with her and her husband.
Very weird.
Very weird.
Are you not a grown up yet, Valerie Jarrett? Can't find a place to live yourself. But I suppose now, in fairness, they've got a few houses, so I suppose
they live in the one house.
Kind of a bit of social distancing going on there.
I don't
Are they
know.
up there in Martha's Vineyard with their 25 acres of oceanfront?
No,
even though the oceans are rising at an alarming rate.
They all live together in DC or something. Anyway,
That's very disturbing.
Yeah, anyway, so Valerie Jarrett said she's not going to be the VP. But as I said to Magda this morning, if you were going to be the VP and if you were pitching to be VP, and really, let's face it, when you've got Joe Biden as the candidate, you're actually pitching to be the P, not the VP.
Exactly. And I think there's a fair few Democrats out there who would really love the idea of Michelle Obama being the president and her husband being the first man or first boy or whatever.
And I think a lot of independents would be a tough choice now. But anyway, so if you were looking for that, you would release a book or a documentary, a puff piece documentary about yourself right now. That would be the clever thing to do to set yourself up for the VP post and then the P post. So,
but I have to say, can I just once more say it, because I have to say, when I read this, I just couldn't believe it. Because the shamelessness of it, it's like, you know, the thing they say in Ireland, they say, you know, you got some neck on you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, those Obamas now have some neck on them now.
They do.
Because, you know, and actually, truthfully, because Phelim and I are documentary filmmakers, we've made documentaries about international adoption, really heart-wrenching documentaries about international adoption. We've made documentaries about fracking, about global warming. And there are lots of things worth making a documentary about, and I'm being super serious now, and things that do deserve scrutiny and do deserve the light of day and do deserve, by the way, for Netflix to look well on them and to put, have a fantastic 153 million, I think, of an audience available to documentaries available on Netflix. And for the Obamas to choose as the first piece of original production they've done to make it about themselves, it takes a lot of neck. It takes a lot of neck.
Listen, we've talked about it now for 10 minutes, so
we'll
actually,
stop now.
You know, I'm just
that's
saying.
Phelim's way of telling me to stop talking.
No, I'm just saying that's the way. You know, that is there. Talk about self-absorption and narcissism. Like they
win the prize now.
They win the prize. Even got us to talk about them for 10 minutes. So Hollywood, just quickly, Hollywood. There's a pandemic on, so they are doing a fundraiser for independent abortion providers. For the mom and pop abortion providers out there. Planned Parenthood, a big conglomerate, they're getting all this money.
So basically you have all these celebrities in Hollywood who really are feeling for these independent abortion providers who need, by the way, in order to survive, the independent abortion providers need about $50,000 a month. Apparently, according to the story that we're reading in the Hollywood Reporter, right, Phelim?
Yes.
$50,000 a month. And I'm just thinking, Phelim, what you and I could do with $50,000 a month, and many people we could hire here to do independent journalism, to go out and tell the unreported stories that need to be told and heard and known, particularly in a year when we're having an election. But here's what the celebrities of Hollywood are going to devote their time to during a pandemic.
Before we talk about that, if you would like to help us do independent journalism, you can go to the unreportedstorysociety.com.
We'd appreciate a once-off gift, but we could also, and particularly love people who decide to be
generous and give something every month. There's a facility where you can do that as well.
We really appreciate it. And all you've got to do that is go to unreportedstorysociety.com.
So Liz Winstead, Elizabeth Banks, W. Camus Bell, Nikki Glaser, Jenny Slate, who did the abortion rom-com, Sandra Bernhardt, Margaret Cho, are among the stars to take part. And it's very important, Winstead told the Hollywood Reporter, said Winstead, has someone who has had abortions.
So tomorrow, it's happening all day tomorrow on Instagram.
Bless them.
Bless them, okay. Exactly. The same people, by the way, who brought you Shout Your Abortion are behind this initiative.
So, forget it. I think you'll probably have better things to do. Let me recommend something you can do tomorrow. You can go on Amazon and order this book. It's called They Called Me Wyatt by Natasha Hines. Now, it's a thriller, one-of-a-kind espionage thriller, and it captures the voice of a woman caught between multiple worlds, a teenage immigrant, adult woman, murder, drama.
But that's not the reason that you're recommending it, Phelim.
No, it's not. It's because Miss Hines has become the victim of cancel culture. Miss Hines, so lots of people were being arrested on the New York subway. In fact, many of them people of colour, for eating on the subway and getting tickets for eating on the subway. And
can passengers not eat on the subway?
No, you're not allowed to eat in the subway. And in New York, and she took a picture of a New York transit worker eating on the subway,
which is even worse.
Well, you're getting people arrested.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
And she posted it, and it went viral. But the New York subway worker turned out to be a person of colour. So then she was accused of being racist and hating black people. And this book, she had a deal with her publisher, and the publisher, very brave, because these people in the arts world are so brave and so stand up for your rights. They immediately cancelled the book deal. 2,000 people went on, gave the book a 1-star rating.
Horrible.
Even though the book wasn't out yet and they hadn't read it. They cancelled the contract. She was left without a contract. So a very brave publisher, Rebel Media, a Rebel publisher, they have come out and published it now. It's coming out, I think, on the 6th of May. But go on Amazon now, order They Called Me Wyatt. It would be nice to have this at the top of the New York Times bestseller list the first week. It's Natasha Tynes, Tynes. They Called Me Wyatt. Go on Amazon now. Please order it on Kindle or paperback. Let's show the cancel culture that they won't succeed, that all they do is make us stronger. You must do this.
It's an order.
It's an order.
Yes. It's not Governor Newsom, it's Phelim McAleer.
Yeah.
And so I think we're ready for Toby Young.
Yes, let's go.
So we're going to go over now we spoke to Toby Young earlier, and let's hear that interview now. And now we're joined by Toby Young, who is a British social commentator. He is the associate editor of The Spectator, where he writes a weekly column. And I know this is a special time for people from The Spectator, 10,000th edition. The Spectator is the longest continuously published magazine on the planet Earth. He's a regular contributor to the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. He's the author of How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, a memoir of 5 years spent working for Graydon Carter at Vanity Fair in New York, where he got even a movie. They made a movie about you, starring Jeff Bridges and Kirsten Dunst. But Jeff Bridges did not play you, is that right?
That's right. He played the Graydon Carter character. I was played by Simon Pegg.
Yes. He's very, very heavily involved in the British free school movement. A free school is the equivalent here of a charter school. And in 2011, he wrote a book called How to Set Up a Free School. He also served as a judge in seasons 5 and 6 of the television show Top Chef.
And according to his wife, who wrote in the Spectator's 10,000th
edition
about what it's like to live with a Spectator writer. It's part of a series of all the writers' wives and partners were asked. She says he is a corona hypochondriac who is using the lockdown to bond with a new puppy, and is ignoring his wife doing massive amounts of housework, only for him to raise his head every so often to say how it looks like they can manage perfectly without a cleaner.
We can really relate to that one.
Yes.
But the reason that we've asked Toby to join us today is that he has recently created a website called lockdownskeptics.org, which we couldn't possibly recommend more as a wonderful clearinghouse for a treasure trove, really, of everything skeptical about what's going on during this pandemic. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you very much.
So, first of all, how is the pandemic going for you?
Yeah, well, I initially thought I had contracted the virus and took to my bed for a week and took various miracle cures like vitamin C, zinc, even some chloroquine. And my wife was skeptical throughout. She thought that I was just trying to dodge the increased housework. I also did suffer from shingles during the same period. My wife thought that was all I was suffering from, brought on by the stress of worrying about catching coronavirus. I have been sent a serological testing kit, but I've yet to, I'm too much of a big girl's blouse to actually prick my finger to produce blood. I want to get one of those little kits for producing blood from a chemist. As soon as I've done that, I'll know for sure. Well, actually, the antibody tests do sometimes produce false negatives, but hopefully I'll have a better idea of whether I actually had it or not. But if I did have it, I've made a complete recovery.
Well, it's okay. It's lucky then that you didn't have to have the actual test for the coronavirus, which I believe involves something being stuck up your nose sufficiently far to nearly touch the base of your brain stem, right?
Yeah, but my two sons came back from a school ski trip in northern Italy in February with dry coughs and fevers. And so my wife took them both to be tested in a hospital car park in Ealing. And they actually had to wait in their car, call the testers, and they then appeared in kind of full hazmat suits. And as you say, they stuck these kind of very long swabs, look like kind of oversized Q-tips. Yeah, they stuck them up the nose, down the throat. They were both in tears at the end of the kind of swabbing, and they were both negative.
Oh, very good.
Well, that'll teach them to go skiing in northern Italy.
We didn't have skiing when I was a lad.
When we were young.
I slept in a drawer.
We'd have been delighted to use the drawer as a way like to slide down the side of the hill or something like that. Yeah, that was fun for us back then.
Yes.
Simpler
one of the perks of the one of the schools I helped set up a few years ago is that they do an annual ski trip, sometimes to Austria, sometimes to Italy.
Very good, very good. So you've created this marvelous resource, the Lockdown Skeptic.
Skeptics.org.
Lockdownskeptic.org. So what's wrong with the lockdown? If one life is saved, isn't
it worth it for one life?
There are various different skeptical arguments. I think about 3 weeks ago, when I first entered this fray, my main argument was indeed that the amount of money we're spending on saving the lives of what, on average, are quite elderly people who probably don't have too much longer to live. So Neil Ferguson, the professor at Imperial College, who's been probably the most influential scientific advisor and who's modelling frightened our government into moving from a mitigation to a suppression strategy. Even he said, when testifying before a select committee in the House of Commons, that roughly 2/3 of the people who've died this year of COVID-19 would probably die this year anyway. So my original argument was that if you use the various metrics used by health economists working for the British government to value a single year of human life, the upper band is around £30,000. And if you calculated how many years of life we were saving by locking our citizens down in this way, and balance that against the likely years of life that would be lost as a result of the lockdown, as a result of the economic contraction it's likely to cause, with increased suicides, increased murder, domestic violence, and so forth, not to mention starvation in the developing world. It looked as though it was the cure was a lot worse than the disease. But since then, I think the arguments developed a bit, and the arguments I've been referring to more frequently on the site, the argument is that actually there's very little evidence, if any, that lockdowns actually produce any public health benefit. Various pieces of quite complicated forensic analysis have been done. One recent one in a magazine called Public Discourse, in which an economist compared those US states which have imposed lockdowns with those that haven't, to see if the mortality from COVID-19 was higher in those states that haven't imposed lockdowns. And he concluded that it wasn't. And he then he did a regression analysis in which he controlled for different local factors such as size of population density, urbanization, the percentage of the population who were black or minority ethnic, and so on and so forth. None of these factors explained why it was that there were different rates of mortality from state to state. And other people have done a similar analysis comparing different US states. Other people have done an analysis comparing those countries in Europe that have locked down with those that haven't. They've also compared countries which have severely locked down with those who have only mildly locked down. Again, always looking at the infection rate and the mortality rate. And there doesn't seem to be any pattern, no correlation between whether a country locked down and how severely it locked down and how many people die of COVID-19 in that country. So the argument now is that the lockdowns, we don't know for sure that they're completely ineffective, but there isn't any evidence that they are effective when it comes to mitigating the impact of the virus. And absent any evidence, it doesn't seem right that that citizens across the world should have ancient rights withdrawn and to be placed under virtual house arrest. The burden of proof, after all, is on those who want to remove our rights, not skeptical people like me who just ask for any evidence at all that is having a public health benefit.
Is there any evidence that it slows that it flattens the curve? You talked about mortality there. Is there any evidence that I want to just say that the argument has now moved on from we need to flatten the curve to we need to stop people getting infected, and we'll come to that later. But is there any evidence that the original reason for the lockdowns was to stop the health services becoming overwhelmed, basically spread out the infections over a longer period of time? Is there any evidence that that's happening, or is the jury out on that as well?
There does seem to be some evidence that engaging in mitigation measures, such as keeping 2 meters apart, quarantining of the elderly and the vulnerable, a banning of social gatherings of 50 people or more, there is some evidence that flattens the curve. What there isn't any persuasive evidence of is that going further than that and imposing more extreme social distancing measures flattens the curve even more. So if you look at Sweden, for instance, the kind of classic counterexample that everyone cites, if you look at Sweden, which has stuck with a mitigation strategy, stuck with the kind of more modest social distancing measures that I just outlined, they've succeeded in flattening the curve just as effectively as other countries which have imposed severe lockdowns on their people, like the UK, like Belgium, like France, Italy, Spain, and so forth. So it looks as though that mitigation works, but there's no need to move from mitigation to suppression.
Okay.
So I know that you were you're a friend of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and I know you've been a cheerleader for him, really consistently and loyally, really up until very, very recently. I'm talking about like the last few days.
Yes.
So
you and James Delingpole, in fact, were arguing last week about this on your podcast, London Calling.
Yes.
Available
Wonderful
wherever
podcast.
You get your podcast.
Yes.
And you were very firmly defending the Prime Minister. James was very sceptical of him. But your position has changed somewhat in the last few days. Tell us why you defended the Prime Minister and why you're now a Boris skeptic.
I wasn't prepared to condemn Boris as vigorously as my friend James Dellingpole because Britain had imposed a lockdown. Initially, Britain's strategy was a mitigation strategy, and after they saw the modelling produced by Professor Ferguson and his team at Imperial College on March 16th, they effectively switched strategies and decided to place Britain under lockdown. James is very cross about that. I think there's plenty of evidence, as I just said, that that's an act of colossal self-harm which doesn't have any redeeming public health benefits. But it wasn't clear. It wasn't as clear then as it is now. And he clearly was being advised by his most senior scientific advisors, and there was probably a majority in the cabinet pushing him to lock down the country. And you can understand that the political risk of not doing so, if evidence emerges that the longer you delay locking down, the more people will die from the disease. And that seemed to be also the international consensus. Governments across the world were locking down. So I forgive him for making what I think in retrospect was clearly a mistake. And I was optimistic last week when James and I were discussing this on London Calling, that when Boris returned to frontline politics, as we know, he contracted the virus, got it quite seriously, ended up in critical care at St Thomas's Hospital in London, didn't go on a ventilator, but had a pretty close call. 2 weeks later is now back at Downing Street. I was optimistic last week that when he returned to the front line of politics, he would announce the end of the lockdown. That seems to be kind of very much his gut instinct. He's not a fan of curtailing liberties. When the lockdown was announced, he talked about how much he regretted violating the inalienable right of all British people to go to the pub. And he is, I think, a liberty lover, a conservative in the conventional sense. So I was optimistic that he would end the lockdown, and he made a speech on the steps of Downing Street. This was his grand re-entrance yesterday. It was shortly after 9 o'clock, and it was very disappointing. He didn't announce that the lockdown was going to end. He essentially said that they were going to keep it in place, that the risk of lifting it at this stage was far too great, that Britain had to avoid a second peak at all costs, and so on and so forth. All the arguments we've been hearing up until now. But now that makes the UK, I think, an extreme outlier across the world. Most governments, as you know, have announced exit plans. Some of them have started to allow different sectors to return to work. Some of them, Denmark, have reopened schools. So it was very disappointing to see Boris kind of cowering in this way and hiding behind the kind of rhetoric that his other ministers in his place have been hiding behind for the past few weeks.
Did he throw in a little bit of Cicero in there as well?
Well, the Cicero quote, I think, was on Friday. The Cicero quote supposedly translates as public health must be put before everything else by good governors. And in Lockdown Skeptics today, we've pointed out that actually that's been mistranslated, and the Latin word in question that's taken to mean public health actually means welfare, prosperity, and certainly is not a justification for sacrificing the economy on the altar of mob hysteria.
Another question I wanted to ask you, Toby, is looking at what's happened here, looking at what's happened across the world. Have you been surprised by the public's very quick acquiescence to these draconian measures? That, I have to say, I'm kind of surprised. Everyone's behaved so fabulously. Everyone has taken it. And I'm wondering if an earlier generation would have been so acquiescent, would have been so docile. And I'm looking at, we're hearing these stories, particularly actually from Britain, of, coppers being really obnoxious about people sitting in their garden with their children and playing ball and stuff. What do you think? Do you think people have changed? Do you think the public have changed? What are your views on that? And it seems fairly global, actually.
I do find it very disappointing. I don't know if you recall that Pixar film of a few years ago, Wall-E, but it was set in the future after climate change has destroyed the planet. And humanity had been reduced to kind of blobs, just kind of being fed from time to time by robots and watching kind of trash on TV. And actually, I think for many people across the world, but particularly in Britain, the prospect of having to stay at home, do very little exercise, watch back-to-back kind of crappy reality shows, eat junk food, and be paid to do that is actually, just a kind of it's a dream come true. They don't regret not being able to do any exercise, not being able to leave their homes, not being able to go to work. It's fantastic. It's like an extended holiday. Christmas has come, and it's happening every day. I think the reaction in some countries has been more encouraging than in others. It's been particularly supine and disappointing in the United Kingdom. We think of, we like to talk about freeborn Englishmen being lovers of liberty, great defenders of their age-old freedoms, talk about the Magna Carta and so on and so forth. But actually to see the supine acquiescence of the British people to essentially being placed under house arrest is really disappointing. Even the Germans have protested and rioted. The Germans, we always think of them in Britain as being kind of, pinched and hidebound rule followers who can't wait to be told what to do, at which point they immediately do it, love nothing more than, following the diktats of someone in authority. And we think of ourselves as these kind of great rugged individualists, but actually turns out the Germans have been far more spirited about objecting to being locked down, and they've come out of lockdown sooner than us, partly as a consequence. And that's true of other countries too. The Belgians have had protests. There have been protests across America in those states that have lockdown. In Michigan, I was very pleased to see that some sheriffs announced that they refused to enforce the shelter-in-place orders of the Democratic governor. The idea that the British police would kind of show any reluctance at all to exercise their new powers is just unimaginable.
It's unimaginable, yeah. Well, in defense of the British people, I would argue perhaps, as you said, it was unclear for the first month or so, or whatever that period was, those few weeks maybe this was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And now it's become clear that it probably wasn't, or there's enough doubt about it, that the rest of the world is getting back to work. I wonder, and we will see, I wonder how supine the British people will be when they see those Germans going back to work, and the French and the Italians. And I think we're seeing it a little bit here in America, in states where the governors are getting drunk on power, realizing that the people are going ahead of the government. People are going back to work. People are going to the beaches. There's more traffic on the streets now, and they're going to have to play catch up. They're going to go, I've had a rethink, and in the interest of public health, I'm going to do this. So maybe the British people are, there was a wartime spirit, and maybe they were told and they believed, just like Boris and just like everyone else did. So maybe let's see, the next few days and weeks may show the British spirit arising again.
Well, let's hope so. There was an opinion poll, an international opinion poll by Ipsos Mori, I think it's just been published, showing the attitude of returning to work and lifting the lockdowns in different countries. And turns out the Brits are more wary of lifting the lockdown and more reluctant to return to work and start going out to restaurants and so forth than almost any other people across the world. I think one of the difficulties that Western governments are now going to face is having kind of whipped up their populations into this kind of hysterical fear of being infected by this mysterious deadly virus with its kind of murky Chinese origins. Might have started in a virology lab, could be a bioweapon, who knows? Anyway, having whipped up their populations into this kind of state of fevered paranoia, aided and abetted by an hysterical mainstream media, it's now going to be quite difficult, I think, in some cases, to persuade people to go back to work and start patronizing restaurants and to start going on holiday again and flying around the world. These governments with their kind of outriders in the media have dug their own graves, and it's going to take a long time, I think, to persuade people that it is actually safe to leave their homes.
Where are you doing your lockdown then?
In Acton, in West London, with my wife and 4 kids.
And are you doing some homeschooling? Are you have you turned yourself into a homeschooling teacher then?
No, the three of them are at one of the charter schools I helped set up, and they have a pretty good remote program in place. So my 15-year-old son, for instance, he has a full timetable of lessons from 10 to 9 till 20 to 4 every day. And the two younger ones, also at the same school, they have a kind of partial timetable, but they're in front of their computers every day doing something. So luckily, I haven't had to do anything.
And are you then? And what's the rules there? You're allowed to take exercise once a day. Is that correct?
Well, the golden rule is that in order to leave your home, you need a reasonable excuse. And then the police have issued guidance as to what does and doesn't constitute a reasonable excuse. So if you want to take exercise, that is a reasonable excuse. But if you drive somewhere to take exercise, that's only a reasonable excuse if the walk you do once you've driven there takes longer than the round trip journey. To which the obvious response is, well, it would probably take me about 6 hours to drive to the Highlands and 6 hours to drive back again. But if the walk I did took longer than 12 hours, would that be okay?
No problem.
The other loophole is that
No, sorry. Just say that again. So the drive has to be shorter than the exercise you take.
So it has to take less time to drive there and back to whichever beauty spot you want to go hiking in than it does to actually hike at the beauty spot. But you can get around that by just going for a really long walk when you get there. There's another kind of constabulary in order to try and discourage people from visiting a local beauty spot, which is this kind of azure blue lagoon. They've dyed the lagoon black. They get the Chief Wiggum Award for kind of unbelievable dumbass policing. But there are all sorts of things. The police across the United Kingdom have set up hotlines, so wannabe members of the Stasi can dob in their neighbours who they think aren't complying with the what is it? I think the mantra is stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. We've changed that on Lockdown Skeptics to, I think, stay sane, protect the economy, save livelihoods.
So in a country where chemicals are in short supply, the cops have managed to find some chemical that they can put in a water to dye it black, and they've sent out 10 coppers to do it. And how do you even fill a lagoon?
Oh, but the ingenuity of it. I mean, the energy and ingenuity put into the kind of nonsense ideas. I mean, have you been stopped by the police yet? I'm proud to say I've been stopped for walking inappropriately. Have you been stopped yet?
No, I haven't been stopped, and no members of my family have been stopped yet. But I'm looking forward to the day it happens, because that will, of course, make a great Spectator column. But one of the good things, I suppose, about the police combing the streets, looking for people who aren't complying with the shelter-in-place orders, is that at least they aren't combing through our social media feeds, looking for evidence that we've committed what the British police call non-crime hate incidents, which is when you haven't actually committed a crime, but when you've tweeted something such as you've misgendered someone on Twitter or something, or you've liked a comic verse about trans people. These are actual incidents. The police will say, well, you haven't committed a crime, but if you repeatedly tweeted these kinds of things, that might amount in due course to a crime. So we're going to feel your collar now and record this against your name on our records. And if you apply for a job as a teacher or a carer, and it's on your record that you've been found guilty of committing a non-crime hate incident, that can prevent you from actually getting a job as a teacher or a carer. It's absolutely shocking.
Have you noticed, by the way, I'm just going to segue into food because I'm really fascinated by the fact that you have this other part, a huge part of your life, which is you're a massive foodie, which, I'm a massive foodie myself. I will have a cook-off one of these days. One of the things that's happened in this lockdown and shut in is people are cooking. An awful lot of people are cooking. A friend came over the other day and gave me a sourdough starter, which then he'd started to describe how I would actually make bread using said sourdough starter, which scared the bejesus out of me. And I'll tell you, it's now lying dormant in my fridge and may well stay there for many years to come. You are a cook. What is your go-to? What have you been cooking? Have you been cooking a lot?
I've been doing well. If I say I've been doing some of the cooking, and my wife then sees this, she will be furious because, in truth, she has been doing 95% of the cooking. I did cook some steaks for my children yesterday, which we served with mashed potato and peas. I sometimes do a kind of spicy spaghetti bolognese with lots of chipotle sauce. I do a nice chicken risotto, which my children like. My wife and my daughter are both vegetarians, so we quite often, if you do cook for the family, you have to cook two separate meals, which can be a bit burdensome. To tell you the truth, I'm more of a food consumer.
Oh yeah, very good. I like that. Yes. That'd be
yes.
kind of like you, Philip.
That's me.
Yeah,
That's me.
exactly. And then the other thing that we ask an awful lot of our guests, we ask them, what's the cocktail or mocktail that they would make if asked?
Yeah, well, I like gin and tonics. I don't know if that counts as fancy enough, but on Top Chef, you mentioned in your intro that I did a couple of seasons as a judge on Top Chef. Back then, I don't know if it still is. Now that I'm not on it, it probably isn't. But back then, it was the highest rated food reality show on cable, and we did it. One of the great things about it was that me and Tom Colicchio, who was one of the other judges and who was himself a very successful chef and restaurateur, we used to drink these. He used to make fantastic gin and tonics. He had his own particular brand of gin that he used. He had a particular combination of herbs and garnishes and
botanicals.
Tonic that
Yes.
And towards the end of the evening, I mean, these shows could take, hours to record, and would often be there till 4 o'clock in the morning and doing take after take, and it was just unbelievably tedious. You can understand why Simon Cowell insists that all the reality shows he does are live, filmed as live or live, because then you get it done in an hour or so. But these, they took 16 hours sometimes to film a single episode. And for the last 4 or 5 hours, Tom Colicchio and I would be guzzling these gin and tonics, which we had just below the kind of camera eye line. And by the final take, we'd be completely trashed. But those were the best gin and tonics I've ever had. I've tried to reproduce those ever since without quite managing it.
We don't know what gin he was using, do we?
I think it was Tanqueray, but I could be wrong.
And the other question we ask people is, we ask all our guests to share a piece of art, a book, a movie, a poem, anything that they think would inspire.
I've been watching a few of the films, the kind of thrillers about pandemics like Contagion and Outbreak, and they're not nearly as good as I remember them. One book I'd really recommend actually is a book called Mandrake. And it was written by a British science fiction writer who I think is called Susan. I've recommended it on Lockdown Skeptics. It was written in 1964. It anticipates a time in the not too distant future. It's a dystopian satire. The not too distant future in which British people are essentially placed under house arrest by an authoritarian government, and they're told it's because there is this kind of virus out there that might kill them, and because they're persuaded by the authoritarian government that it's in their interests to remain under lock and key, essentially, they all willingly comply with this, and anyone who objects is thought to be a kind of crazy person with a kind of death wish. So it uncannily anticipated this particular moment we're in. Mandrake, it's very good.
Well, we could talk to you forever, by the way. I mean, there's so much to talk about with this pandemic, with all the stuff about the food. I mean, we didn't even get on to talking about your time in New York and Graydon Carter and getting unceremoniously sacked, which is a story all of its own. But this is really great.
I mean, I think talking, Susan, the Mandrake book and this, I think the fear is, and I think a lot of people are licking their lips, that this is a dry run for the climate health emergency, for the inequality health emergency. Because once you have done all these things in the name of health and people
gotten away with them successfully,
gotten away with them,
you could do it again.
Do you think it'll happen again? Do you think this is a?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, I think, during this crisis is the extraordinary influence that a fairly small group of politically committed scientists who have a particular agenda, not all of them, but for the most part, the extraordinary influence they now have over governments and senior officials across the Western world and indeed in the developing world. And we saw that with, Britain recently passed an act of parliament committing the country to net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. You can see it in the kind of appalling genuflecting to the 15-year-old Joan of Arc figure in the form of Greta Thunberg. So I don't think it's any great surprise. But nonetheless, I think the extraordinary influence of this cadre of unelected experts with their kind of brandishing scientific credentials, the extraordinary influence they now have over governments and senior officials and international organizations. And I don't think that influence is going to wane as a result of this crisis. But I've been thinking that I will write a book of what almost certainly is the greatest act of self-harm ever committed by Western governments. I'm going to call it, my working title is Burning Down the House. But perhaps if enough of us can persuade people that actually listening to these so-called experts has caused us to massively overreact to what has turned out to be something that isn't much more dangerous than a bad bout of seasonal flu. If we can show the colossal harm that's being done by uncritically going along with the diktats of this new class of scientific political masters, then hopefully we can reduce their influence a little bit.
You'd like to think that particularly Britain, who had learned a very good lesson during Brexit about how idiotic and wrong-headed all the experts were, who had said, oh, well, the day after, there's going to be no food in the shops, starvation, there'll be no medicines. I mean, Britain just recently has lived through working out that these experts were 100% wrong about what was going to happen to Britain in a post-Brexit world. They didn't seem to have learned a lot. I think maybe there's something different when people say, you're going to die. It's slightly different.
You were going to die.
You were going to die as well, I suppose. True, that's true.
One would hope so. But actually, if you look at the appalling track record of climate science Cassandras, who for decades have been predicting appalling consequences of not doing exactly what they say, only for those predictions to not come true. I mean, there are numerous websites. James and I on London Calling have read out some of these predictions and the date at which these calamities were predicted to befall. They haven't befallen us. If you look at the track record of Neil Ferguson, the kind of Dr. Strangelove figure who has such an extraordinary grip over the British government. He was involved in managing other viral outbreaks and pandemics like swine flu, mad cow disease, foot and mouth disease, wildly overestimated on almost every occasion, I think, the likely extent of the damage and of the people who were likely to be infected and of the deaths. Got it all completely wrong. Hasn't in any way diminished his authority or made people take him less seriously. So perhaps this time, because it's hard to see how anyone, perhaps a few kind of hedge fund managers, but most people, I think, are going to be adversely affected by this colossal mismanagement of the pandemic. So maybe this time people will think, well, hang on a minute, maybe we should think twice before listening to those same people again.
I think we're certainly hoping that people will be skeptical of models and modelers in the future. I mean, maybe that will be a silver lining out of all of this. We've come to the end of our time here, but thank you so much for
taking the time. Well, I just want to say, so where can people get you? Lockdownskeptics.org.
London Calling.
London Calling. And we didn't get round to it, but I have this year started a pro-free speech organisation called the Free Speech Union. And if anyone wants to find out more about that, the website is freespeechunion.org. It's a non-partisan mass membership organisation that stands up for the speech rights of its members.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, maybe we'll do a separate interview on
free
that.
speech.
Yes, because that's a huge story as well. Okay, Toby. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking time out
Stay
today.
safe. All the best. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
So that was a great interview with Toby.
Yeah. We could talk to him forever.
Yes, and check out his website.
Lockdownskeptics.com. And check him out.
No, it's lockdownskeptics.org, I believe.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, God, you're right. Actually, lockdownskeptics.org. Sorry.
And check him out at The Spectator. Highly recommend it. And we're going to have him back to talk about the Free Speech Union, which is a huge issue in Britain where you can get arrested and put in prison for a tweet. And you can even have, as you say, the cops could call around. Even if your tweet is not a crime, it still could be the prelude to a crime, so it's pre-crime. Pre-free speech crime.
Orwellian 1984 stuff, yeah.
And so we really, I know we've run over time completely here, but we just want to tell you this one really wonderful story, a tale of two COVID-19s. So you may remember Kellyanne Conway made a mistake where she said COVID-19 was called 19 because there were 18 previous viruses.
And she was wrong.
She was lambasted.
But then she was lambasted.
By every media. The Daily Beast called her an idiot. People called her stupid, unfit for her work, etc., etc.
Resign.
Now, Kellyanne Conway is a pollster, not a politician, has no involvement in health. However, an Irish person went on the radio, Simon Harris went on the radio to talk to children about the virus and adults, but mostly the children. He did a little, let's talk to children.
And what did he say the COVID-19 was?
He said COVID-19, so just to let you know, it's called COVID-19 because it first emerged in
2019.
2019, it's nothing.
And I just learned that.
Yes, so Simon Harris said, COVID-19, that's because there were 18 other viruses with that name. And
everyone said it's fine.
Everyone said he was allowed then to apologise about a day later for his,
I have a question.
His boo-boo.
I have a question, Phelim. Who is Simon Harris?
Simon Harris is the Irish Minister for Health.
Oh.
And he didn't make the mistake 3 months ago. He made the mistake like 3 days ago or 4 days ago.
So did he get lambasted in the media?
Was there any calls for his resignation? No.
Has he resigned?
No, the Irish media, as they say, they put on the green jersey. Irish politicians are wonderful during the pandemic, especially if you're one of the politicians who helped bring in an abortion to Ireland. Then you can do no wrong in the media's eyes. So he's allowed to skate. Kellyanne Conway has to resign in ignominy. And that is the way the world is this week. That's just typical. I mean, we're learning an awful lot about the media in this pandemic. Yeah. Probably a lot of stuff that we knew already. But what's really good is because the pandemic is happening everywhere. Then it's really clear. It's even more clear than normal, crystal clear, how different the media treats the same story and the same response to the story. Yeah. But if you're a different political party or a different philosophical outlook, but we're coming to the end. And by the way, we just love this. We got a lovely message from a fan who wrote on the Apple Podcast, which you can do, gave us a 5-star rating. Yeah, you leave a review on Apple. Go on the Apple Podcast app. Just look for the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
And this lovely person called Ali Taffel said, Anne and Phelim are the podcast hosts you would love to have as friends. Terrific coverage of the daily events of life. Well, thank you so much. We love having you, and we love having everyone here. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow on The Scoop.
On the Daily Virus.
On The Scoop tomorrow.
Yes. All the best.
Bye. Thank you.